Hello, everyone, and virtual greetings here from the Globe and Mail head office. Welcome to the inaugural Women Lead Here Summit, the virtual summit. I don't think I need to clarify since you're all looking through a screen right now. My name is Deborah Arts, and I am a senior program manager here at the Globe, which means I tend to the care and feeding of some of our editorial ranking programs, including the Women Lead Here program. On behalf of all of my colleagues at the Globe, most of whom are working remotely today, we are very excited that so many of you have joined us from across the country and from beyond. So I am here for the next few minutes to set the table about what we are going to accomplish in the next few hours and to provide a little bit of a context that I hope will foster some of the conversations that we will be having throughout the day. I'll start with a few words about Women Lead Here. You may have seen it, maybe while you registered. You may be familiar, you may not be. But for those of you who aren't, Women Lead Here is a new-ish annual program that we created at Report on Business magazine to benchmark executive gender parity in Canada. Now that's a lot of words, and I'll get into the methodology a little bit. I promise you I'll keep it brief. We're not going to bore you with statistics and models. But our first list was published in March of this year, in not quite in the before times, but just about afterwards. It feels like another lifetime ago. So the journey to today's event, started nearly a year and a half ago. And can I have next slide, please? Oh, next slide after this, apologies. Yes, okay, so excuse a little bit of very base pandering to the audience, but it started about a year and a half ago, and this is Hazel. So she is nearly 6 now. In this photo, she was 4 years, 5 months, and 21 days old. She's the kind of person who tracks these things. So Hazel is my daughter, so yes, full disclosure, I am pandering. But like most little girls, and most of the little girls in her class and in her activities and that she sees in the playground, she has an incredible fierce energy that just astounds me. She is very smart, she is very brave, and she is diligent, and she is hardworking. And I am kind of glossing over the negative aspects because parenting a child like this can be exhausting, as I think many of you in the audience know. But mostly, I just can't wait to see how these traits manifest as she grows and becomes a person in the world. I see it with other little girls on the playground and classrooms every day. I saw it earlier this week when I dropped her off at school for the first 6 months. These girls are incredible. So when our team was developing Women Lead Here, I'd drop off the kid you see in the photo here every morning at school. And then I'd come to work and I would see headlines like this. Next slide, please. And headlines like this. Next slide, please. And headlines like this. The next slide, please. So, I mean, I don't think any of these headlines will surprise anyone here. We see them distressingly often enough, but I also think I am not the only one who is pretty tired of seeing them, and who's pretty tired of the disconnect between the spirit of the girls and women who are growing up and doing incredible things and have this fierce energy and situations like this. So, next slide, please. That's why we gathered our team together in a meeting and we said, we know this is a problem. We know that gender inequity in the workplace is a problem. No denying it, there's no debating it. Let's not waste any time on that subject. Let's focus on what can we at the Globe and Mail do about it. So that was the genesis of our work on Women Lead Here. Our team decided that we could use the platform that we have, that we're very privileged to have at the Globe and Mail and Report on Business magazine, to create kind of a new way of measuring gender diversity in the executive ranks of some of the country's biggest companies. So that was kind of where we started, the problem we set out that we wanted to solve. Next slide, please. Oh, can you go back one slide? Sorry. Yes. So this is what we wanted to focus on. to focus on who in corporate Canada is doing well. We want to focus on those who have made some progress instead of necessarily just going through those who haven't. We want to learn from them, those who have done the work and made some progress towards a more gender diverse leadership team. In other words, to simplify it down to very basic terms, we wanted to measure what does good look like today. Our kind of guiding principle in this is you cannot change what you cannot measure and you don't understand. So we wanted to get a base mark of where things stand today and to use that as something that we can build on in the years to come. Next slide, please. Now, if that sounds like a big project, it certainly was. And we didn't want to mess it up. So we brought in a wonderful, wonderful advisory board of individuals who are doing incredible work in various capacities in the quest for gender equity. So I would be very remiss if I didn't publicly thank the 8 women on our advisory board for their contributions in guiding our research and in bringing this to life. Lynn Beauregard, Carolyn Coetzee, Rola Dagger, Maureen Jensen, Jody Kovitz, Justina Umakwa, Paulette Senior, and Louise Taylor Green. Several of these women will be speaking later on today and you'll get a chance to hear from them, but they're all incredible and we were so lucky to have their help and guidance as we brought this into the world. Next slide, please. So together, we came up with a mission for the program, which comprised really 3 goals. We wanted to benchmark how Canada's largest businesses are performing in female representation. I mentioned that a little earlier. We wanted to tell the stories. We are a media organization. We excel at telling stories and we have a platform, so we wanted to do that, to tell the stories of organizations that have made some progress and get into how they've done so when it comes to executive gender parity. And finally, to inspire more businesses and organizations, even really large, really complex ones, to implement strategies that can transform the gender makeup of their executive teams. Next slide, please. Now, this is what we did. We evaluated more than 500 of the largest publicly traded companies in Canada. We decided to start there because it was easier and more reliable to get the data about public companies. And we thought that this is just where we will start. In future years, we may want to expand that into different types of organizations, but this is where we started in year 1. We basically, I'm simplifying what was a fairly complex process into something digestible, but we measured the percentage of women identifying individuals holding jobs in the top 3 tiers of executive management. Now, about 3 tiers, we didn't do it by specific job title because that can vary from organization to organization. We did it based on the basically levels of their org chart. And I would also like to clarify a moment of language here too. We will use, when I use the word women throughout the rest of the presentation today, we do refer to women identifying individuals. It's just a shorthand I will use throughout the rest of the presentation. So we did that. We developed a methodology that assigns points and based on the ratio of female to male identifying individuals, layering and added points for other elements of diversity, and the company performance as well. And we put all the data together, we analyzed it, and we came up with some pretty interesting conclusions. And this is where the fun stuff begins. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with the less encouraging data because it's never good to end on a bit of a downer. So we looked at 509 publicly traded companies. We evaluated them, we looked at their executive ranks. Only 28 of those 509 companies had a female CEO or co-CEO. That's not 28%, that's 28 total out of 509. So that was, obviously not the most encouraging thing. It wasn't necessarily a surprise, but that was where the numbers shook out. So moving on to the next big number on the same slide, but the next big number here, of the more than 5,000 executives that we gathered data on for this project, only 18% identify as women. So again, that's certainly a better ratio than the number of CEOs, but still on the lower side. And then this is the stat that I found the most surprising out of the data that we gathered. Of the 509 companies that we looked at, 151 had no women at all in senior executive roles. That's nearly 30% of the largest companies in Canada with some basic back of the envelope math. And that we found, certainly a bit of a wake up call in terms of the data. Next slide, please. So I share these stats not to dishearten, but to contextualize what the greater situation is for the pool that we were looking at. Now I'm going to go to the better results, the happier results out of this. So after screening and analyzing the data extensively, we arrived at a cohort of about 73 companies that we considered to be best in class. These are the ones who represented what good looked like. Each of them had executive teams that were at least 30% women identifying. And on average, actually, across the 73 companies in the best in class cohort, female representation was 44% of executive positions. So that's not parity quite, but it's not far. Each of them, crucially, they also all had more than one woman in an executive role. We didn't want to include any companies on this list who maybe only had one woman in a senior role. We just felt that we needed to identify good as a little bit better than that. So each of these 73 businesses earned the Women Lead Here seal for 2020. Next slide, please. So this slide here, I'll linger on it for a minute while I talk a bit more. These are our 73 honorees, the 73 companies that earned the Women Lead Here seal. They were all profiled in the April issue of Report on Business magazine. I'll share the link a little later. So you'll see that there's a broad range of industries represented, and it varies a good deal here. I'll draw attention to a few sectors that are strongly represented. We found that retail, real estate, and media were very strongly represented. Also, mining and finance, which was more of a surprise, and you'll hear a little bit more of that in our panels later today, but pleasant to have those sectors represented as well. And in general, the bigger a company gets in terms of revenue, the rarer it is for the women to ascend to leadership roles, although that's an imprecise and imperfect art. Most of the companies on the list have attendees here today. Congratulations to you all, and you'll be hearing from a lot of them throughout the day as well. So it is important to stop and recognize progress and to give these companies the credit and recognition that they have earned for the achievements that they have made. But it is also really important not to rest on our laurels, and arguably it's never been more important. Why? Because since our list was published in March, like as you know, the world has changed dramatically. That feels like the understatement of the year. And that means we are now seeing headlines like this. Next slide, please. And this. And also this. So we still have a lot of work to do, and that is why we are here today. Over the next few hours, you're going to hear panels and speakers who I hope will inform and inspire you. Throughout the agenda, you're going to have a chance to submit questions to them. Now, given the size of the audience today and the high volume of questions we expect, we won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll do as many as we can. There's an ask button on the bottom of your screen. You should see that there, and that's how you can submit a question for consideration. With that said, also, I'd just like to ask three things of you today. First things first, be respectful. Now, we're all here to achieve the same goals. There are going to be people speaking today who have wonderful experience and wonderful ideas and who have done wonderful things to achieve some progress here. Nobody is suggesting that anybody up here is doing it perfectly, but we're all here to try to get better. So let's keep that in mind as we proceed throughout the agenda. Please contribute on a similar vein. Please contribute constructively. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. I forgot to ask that. So if you do submit a question, please do so in the spirit of working towards collective progress and helping us to move forward and advance the conversation. And finally, now this is a bit of a personal challenge, commit to make change. So this one is, again, something I challenge each of you to do. Commit to putting at least one idea that you hear today into practice in your own work. Briefly, but importantly, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. Next slide, please. Oh no, this slide, this is correct, thank you. We couldn't have done this event today and had such a huge audience and made it available to all of you without the support of our sponsors. So thank you very much to gold sponsors CPP Investments and Citi, our supporting partner, Colliers International, which is also a Women Lead Here honoree this year. The Report on Business Academic Advisory Board, who help us throughout the year for a lot of different reasons, and that would be the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary and the Smith School of Business at Queen's University. Next slide, please. Thank you also to our brand partners who also helped us bring the event to life today. So that would be Cogeco, Dream, First Capital, Genworth Canada, Hudson's Bay, Prairie Sky Royalty Limited, Seven Generations Energy, Rotman, and Tri-Summit Utilities. Next slide, please. So, 3 more quick things, and then I will get out of your face and we'll get to the conversation. So if you'd like to learn more, again, I mentioned earlier about this year's Women Lead Here winners, please visit tgam.ca/Women Lead Here. You'll see all of our editorial coverage from earlier in the year. And I highly, highly recommend you check that out. Also, if you'd like to post to social media, please do. We would love to keep the conversation alive and vivid on socials as well. Our hashtag is ROB Women Lead Here. So please use it often and use it freely. And finally, we will be recording today's proceedings. So you will receive a link in the next week or so using the email address you used to register. That will include a link to the full video for today. So if you're furiously taking notes or if there's anything you want to keep track of, you don't need to do so. We can absolutely get that to you at that point. So, okay, on that note, I'm going to stop talking and let the proceedings get started with our first panel of the day, which is called Building Diversity, Solutions and Strategies from High Diversity Companies. So I would like to turn it over to my very, very capable colleague, Rita Treacher, who's a senior business writer and columnist at ROB Magazine. If you don't read her stuff, you absolutely must. She'll be moderating the discussion. So Rita, over to you.
Thanks, Deb. Welcome everyone to our inaugural event and to my very exciting panel. I want to thank everyone for being here today and for dedicating their time to thinking about such an important topic. It is one that I write about often in my column for the Globe and Mail, and I am someone who is focused largely on solutions. I don't just outline the dynamics of a problem. I like to discuss what can be done to solve that problem. And so in that spirit, I would like to launch into my panel, which is Building Diversity, Solutions and Strategies from High Diversity Companies. Our panel will discuss how corporations on the Women Lead Here list have achieved progress in female executive representation. Now, our panel is made up of both top performers from the list and other diverse organizations. And our panelists will share what they have learned, their goals for the future, and what we can strive for corporate leadership. I just want to remind the audience members that you can submit questions, and we will be taking questions towards the end of the panel. You can do so, as Deborah has instructed you, by using the Ask button, which is located at the bottom left corner of your screen. So before we get started, I would like to introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce everyone to Marc Parent. He is President and CEO of CAE Inc. CAE is a global provider of training and simulation services for civil aviation, defense, security, and healthcare. Marc was appointed CEO in 2009, and he has over 30 years of experience in the aerospace industry. So hello, Marc. Next, we'd like to welcome Mary Sullivan, Senior Managing Director and Chief Talent Officer for CPP Investments, which is also known to us as the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. CPPIB oversees the retirement investments of over 20 million Canadians, and Mary joined the organization in 2015, and she has over 25 years of human resources experience, including for companies such as Holt Renfrew and Four Seasons Hotel. Welcome, Mary. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Ira Thomas, President and CEO and Director of Lucara Diamond Corporation, as well as the Report on Business Magazine's latest cover star. Ira is a geologist by trade and co-founded Lucara in 2007. The company has mining operations in Botswana, and Ira became its CEO in 2018. So please welcome Ira Thomas as well. So thank you all for being here. I wanted to start off with a question for all of you, and really to understand what gender diversity means to each of you, and how does your organization define it? So Ira, why don't we start with you?
Thank you very much, Rita, and I hope you can hear me. As luck would have it, my neighbors have just started up their gardening project next door, so I apologize if it becomes very loud. Listen, I think for me, you know, I think we have to, and we can all appreciate that this is a journey. So I started out my career as a geologist, and I worked my way up into an executive role and started my first company in 1999. And I saw, I think, firsthand the value of diversity in all its respects, not just with women, but working in the North and working with local Indigenous communities. And what that really taught me is that there's real value in seeking that kind of diverse kind of point of view. And for me at Lucara today, you know, I've been able to attract some top talent, and a lot of that top talent is women, because we've tried to create and foster an environment which is welcoming and does and is regarded as a good place to work, because your viewpoint is respected.
So next I'll go to Mary. Mary, what does gender diversity mean to you, and how does your organization define it?
Sure, and I will echo some of what Ira has said. I think that diversity in all of its forms, for me, just leads to better business outcomes. So I'll take the question in two respects. As the head of talent at CPP, opening up the opportunity to access talent of all nature across the globe is really going to make for a better employee base at CPP. And then as an investor around the world, you know, there are myriads of studies that demonstrate that a more heterogeneous group will lead to better outcomes on any task, most specifically investment returns, which we're seeking on behalf of Canadians.
And Mark, what about you? What does gender diversity mean to you, and how does CAE define it?
Well, first and foremost, it's a smart thing to do for the reasons that we just said. It's a great thing for business. It's a great thing. You know, it leads to better decisions, creates a better culture where people feel, you know, valued and represented in the organization. It leads to better performance. And most importantly for me personally, I miss normal. You know, it's what it should be. So this is what we need to strive for. You know, when I look at, I have my three children are all in university, and my son's a senior. The other two are just right behind. And the last thing I want is my son to have more opportunity than my girls in life. And to me, that's just a normal thing. So for us to be, you know, if I look at my leadership team, a few years ago, we only had one woman in the organization, and was kind of in a support staff role. Now I have, you know, three. Actually, if we had this meeting yesterday, I had four. Change in the organization, but moves in and out of the company. But we had, you know, a strong representation at the senior levels of corporation in a company that, you know, traditionally you think about, you know, description of our company, aerospace, engineering, tech, you know, very historically male dominated. So to me, it's a normal thing to do, leads to better business.
Is that something that you did deliberately, Mark, as CEO? Did you come in and say, oh, where are the women? And I'm going to make this part of our corporate strategy? Was that a deliberate decision?
Absolutely. I think, look, if you're going to drive change, you have to make it happen. You have to, as you were saying, well, you have to put concrete steps. You have to make it a goal in the organization. That's what we've done, is set, you know, objectives. And it's not hard because in the end of the day, when we work with search firms, for example, I have to say, okay, well, you need to bring me an equivalent slate of good candidates. And I have made absolutely no compromises with, and quite the contrary, with the kind of talent that I have around my table. So you have to push it.
That's a great point. I mean, and it also really emphasizes the importance of tone at the top, which is something that we hear a lot about in the business community. Ira, I want to go to you for a second, because the vast majority of Lucara's executive team is female. Perhaps you can tell us how the company achieved that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And you know, building on what Mark was saying, you know, I think for us, we really focused on finding the best talent. And quite frankly, there was a lot of really good female talent. And what was important, however, was securing that talent. I find more often than not, when you find a really, you know, well qualified female candidate, you know, you face kind of competition. And the difference, I think, is that women want to go to an organization where they feel valued and welcomed and part of the strategy of building that organization. It's not just a job. And I think that a lot of women are very discerning. So, you know, identifying the talent is one piece, being able to attract that talent, and not only attract it, but retain it and work with that talent and convince them that you can provide them with an opportunity, not just for this year or next year, but over the next 5 to 10 years, where they can actually grow with the organization and be part of it. And I think that's been fundamental to our success. You know, we have 85% of my executive team is female, and my managing director of our mine in Botswana is also the first ever female managing director in Botswana. And so, yes.
That's amazing, 85%. That's really something. You set the bar, I think, with that statistic. Mary, I want to talk to you a bit about how CPPIB approaches the issue of gender diversity as an institutional investor.
Sure, thanks. Thanks very much for the question. You know, along with being committed to gender diversity inside the organization, we recognize our privileged position as being an investor in organizations around the world. So starting back in 2017, we really took up the issue of gender diversity on boards, and in Canada, started to vote against the lead director on the committee that was responsible for director nominations if the board had no female directors. And in the last year, we have expanded that work globally, and we've seen results. So when in the first year we did this, we cast votes at 45 Canadian companies, and a year later, 47% of those companies had female directors. Now, there's lots of pressure on organizations outside of what CPP is doing, but we think that that's really critical. We've taken that practice globally now, and in 2020 voted against 323 public companies around the world for failing to have any women on their boards.
Well, that's fantastic. The voting power of institutional investors is really something that could move the needle on the issue of gender diversity in corporate Canada. I just wanted to stay with you for a minute and just ask you, there's some people who would say that just having one woman on a board is a pretty low bar. Can we expect your organization to ratchet it up a bit, ratchet up the pressure and raise the bar a bit?
Yeah, I would agree that it's a low bar. So there's more. So some of those, if you're talking about some people, you'd be talking about me, and of course our institution as well. So we have moved that up in 2020. We in Canada again. You know, we've tackled this first in Canada and then taken it globally. But in Canada, we've now moved our bar up to 2 women on boards, and of course, our own board of directors is often held up as sort of a gold standard, where we have 58% of our board members female, and the women and men of our board are so committed to this movement. It's great.
That's fantastic. 58% of the board and 85% of Lucara's executive team. These are amazing statistics. I hope everyone who's listening out in the business community pays attention and emulates these examples. Mark, I want to go back to you. What programs does your company have to increase the number of women in your organization and in leadership roles?
Well, look, I'm proud to say we have a lot of them. And to me, I mean, first of all, we're very, very big on leadership development and organizational development as a whole at CE, because people say you overused term that people are your most valued asset, all those kind of things. Well, I know for a fact that that's the case. I've made a whole career out of it. So just specifics, I mean, we have a program called DARE, which is a leadership program targeted specifically at women, both leaders and individual contributors in the organization. It actually spans over years, very innovative. It's fully developed, with conferences, webinars, books, discussions, and an assignment mentor to help women in their professional development. And what I'm always proud of that is how many people, mainly men, put themselves forward as mentors. And so that makes it very, very rich. And it touches on, some of the tasks that we give them are real organizational challenges. So that's one program. We also have what we call CA Mentor Me. And it's in line with our core values, where it helps connect women towards building up on development initiatives that they have. And three others that we have a LEAP program. And this is to develop women as leaders of our training centers. What we do is we train pilots around the world. We're number one in the world. We have training centers all the world. And one thing I've noticed is we do exceptionally well when we have women in charge of those training centers. And that may be coincidence. I don't think it is, actually. So we developed that program. Put yourself forward as one of our training center leads around the world. Finally, we have a Ken Patrick program. Ken Patrick's the name of our founder, which is a program that is targeted at women coming out of engineering and technical disciplines, where out of the coming right out of university, 50% of the graduates going into this program, which is a 2-year program where you migrate to different positions in the organization, 50% have to be women. And of course, we know that coming out of engineering schools, it's not 50%. So we're priming the pump. And finally, we've altered all our talent and leadership programs to put in specific quotas, so that make sure that we are priming the pump, to make sure that, we, in the end of the day, if you want to have 50% of the top, you have to start somewhere. And so the pipeline needs to be vertical going up, that we're targeting 50% all the way up.
Quotas used to be a bad word, Mark. How do you address anyone who is holding on to those sorts of views?
Well, I think that very, very quickly, people may have that gut reaction, that it's so rooted in the past, that quotas. But when they actually start getting into it, they see the kind of candidates that they get in front of them, they realize that bring it on. And I think, unfortunately, I've seen this many times before, and that a man for a given position, if they'll put themselves forward if they have a fraction of the capabilities. But you put a woman, typically, and maybe an exaggeration, but they won't put themselves forward to have 80% of the competencies. Then they'll say they're ready. Man, I'm ready, 20%. So you get better candidates if you ask women, put yourself forward, and that quota helps you do that.
Excellent. Ira, I want to go to you. How does your company use metrics or internal targets? And how do you measure progress? Oh, Ira, you're muted. Maybe you can unmute yourself.
Sorry,
go ahead.
The lawnmower is stopped now, so I'll stay unmuted. Listen, for our organization, which is a small organization, we really focused on, building that diversity in at the executive board level. Our board is also 50% women. And now our real challenge is kind of looking throughout the organization, particularly because we're a mining company. So there's very traditional roles in mining, truck drivers and people actually working in the facilities. And so we are working hard now on trying to encourage young women to think about roles within our organization, not just in kind of the legal department and sustainability and environments, but also in mining itself. So we have programs of certainly of mentorship and training initiatives specifically focused on trying to build out that diversity throughout the organization, not in pockets of the organization. So I would say that that's our challenge. But it's really foundational to the work that we do with our HR department in career development, identifying candidates and then mentoring them through their kind of career cycle. And I think, the other thing that we're working very hard on, particularly in Botswana, and it's interesting, in Botswana, there actually is wage parity. When I first went to Botswana 2 years ago and sat down with kind of my employees and talked about, okay, we're going to look hard at gender parity, and they all looked at me with like quizzically, and they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I want to make sure that our female employees are getting paid the same amount for the same job. And they said, well, of course they are. They've just never done it any other way. So it was actually a nice surprise. Botswana has been very progressive. So we already have that kind of attitude that's sort of built into the culture. Now it's really about trying to convince women to think about their roles and opportunities differently. And that starts, I think, also, right in the schools. We're very involved in our communities. We're very involved in going into the schools and working with the kids and the young women in particular, just to make them aware and build that awareness, because I think that is the first step in this whole journey. We can talk about quotas, and I think all of these tools are tools in the toolbox which help, but ultimately we need to get these young women choosing careers and thinking about their futures differently.
And Mary, from an investment perspective, how do you measure the success of gender diversity?
Sorry,
the sound go?
The sound went.
Okay, from an investment perspective, how do you measure progress or success around gender diversity?
I think that within our own organization, we set out initially with a target to hire 50-50 by the year 2020, and happily we met that ahead of time. I think that setting targets is absolutely critical to achieving success in this world, because if you take a bunch of highly capable, highly ambitious people like we have working at CPP, they're going to achieve goals that you set for them, and they're not going to compromise in any way in terms of the way that they seek that out. It just opened up the aperture and widened the funnel in terms of the candidates that were coming to us. Over time, that starts to get more sophisticated, because what we ultimately are seeking is a diverse workforce. And so if that only includes white women of privilege, able-bodied, et cetera, we're not solving the problem at all. And if it's not at the heart of the work that we do, which is investing, we're putting Band-Aid on a solution. So we really started to focus in on broad diversity and women in senior investing roles, and what are the supports we have to put in place to get there. In terms of measuring the success of investments specifically, because we invest for the long run, we invest for generations. We don't do any studies of our own diverse teams and the outcomes per se. There's lots of great evidence out there. The most recent one that I like is, as you likely know, it's a 100-year anniversary of women's suffrage, when women across the U.S. finally got the right to vote, and states couldn't make their own independent decisions about that. And so Goldman Sachs did a study this year, and they looked at almost 500 equity funds in the U.S., and they looked at the male-led ones, which were 380, and they looked at, and then they looked at the all female-led, and then some portion female-led. So they took just that portion that was a third, that were a third of the senior management team was female, and they outperformed. They outperformed in what was one of the craziest markets that any of us have ever seen through coronavirus. And so those sorts of things just continue to give us evidence, as well as the independent decisions that are being made by the women at CPP that we can see are excellent investment decisions.
Excellent. There's a big difference between diversity and inclusion. So I wanted to ask each of you, starting with Ira, what are the hallmarks of an inclusive corporate culture?
Well, and that's a great, it's a great point, because we can set targets and we can achieve things and goals that look good on paper, but at the end of the day, it is all about inclusion. And if you're really going to drive value, and I think for us, it's been about understanding the importance of communication, and I mean real communication throughout our organization, to not only respect that there's diversity and diverse points of view, but how do you actually take those diverse points of view and actually build them into actionable items that you can measure and your success by. And I think that is our real challenge. And I would say we're still early in that journey. But what I have learned through this process, and particularly with the teams that we've built, is that that again, that tone from the top. It's important that the board sets that tone, and then the executive sets that tone, and then we've got to work hard each and every day with all of our leaders on the ground, because it's a change, certainly, and not something that can happen overnight. So we're working kind of with smaller groups. We are regularly holding kind of, and right now through COVID, largely through Zoom, but organizational calls that are very inclusive, where I get on a Zoom call with our entire workforce in Botswana, which is not huge, but it's 1,100 people, and we're giving kind of those people a voice and an opportunity to communicate and give us the feedback kind of in real time of whether these strategies and programs are actually working, where they're working and where they're not, and how we can make improvements. So for us, it's been all around our communication strategy and how we continue to kind of lead and set the tone at the executive level.
Mark, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think that the only thing I would say is beware of our unconscious biases, in all aspects of diversity and inclusion. And it's funny because when you do it, we've done testing at, first of all, at our level, myself and my team, and then we've rolled out training for everyone in the organization. We're actually in the midst of doing it now. It's very interesting what you find is, like, I'll give you just an example. The one woman in my team who's very, very progressive and pushing the agenda forward on diversity and inclusion, she did this testing and she says, "Oh my God, I'm biased against women." Herself, and she realized, by the way, she was, but it's unconscious. It's unconscious. Myself was very happy. I did the testing and said, "You're not biased at all, one way or another." It's very interesting. But to me, I thought, okay, well, why is that? Well, anybody who's seen my mother knows why that is the case. The ultimate matriarch. And it comes from it comes from someplace. Look, I think just going back to what was saying, Ira, diversity is important, but it can't go without inclusion. And inclusion and diversity, not only for gender, but across race and across all aspects of diversity. And we need to, if we don't have an inclusive culture at the company, we're not getting the best of our people. We're not extracting the power of the organization, and we're not leading to an organization where everybody in the organization feels that they could personally come to work and make a personal difference for a company and for the world. And that's really how you get the power out of an organization, if you manage to do that.
I'm glad that you touched on the issue of race. One of the things that has really come to light during this pandemic is that systemic racism is so pervasive. And obviously, women come in all shapes, sizes, colors. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the intersectionality of gender and race. And I see that one of our audience members has put forth a very similar question. What needs to be done to ensure that we're including all women as part of this discussion, and all women as in corporate Canada? I mean, it's not just about, I suppose, strictly race either. It's about sexual orientation. It's about women with disabilities as well. There's plenty of women that we need to include. So I would like to ask each of you, starting with Mary, what are some of the strategies that we can think of? to make sure that this is as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, sure. And I think on the inclusion front, it ultimately is in the eye of the beholder. And so the way that you will determine whether the myriad of initiatives you have in place are working is how people tell you they're feeling. And that's men, that's women, that's people of color, etc. And so I think it's really important that you regularly check in on of these many programs that we have in place, having outcomes like better gender representation as one outcome is one check mark, but really you have to zone in on how are people feeling? Are they willing to speak up at work? Are they willing to exert extra energy in order to make your organization successful? Do they feel as though they have an equal opportunity to all others within the workplace? And so asking that regularly and parsing through the results on the basis of any number of differential factors is really, really important. I think that it's very, very clear that organizations like Catalyst have highlighted throughout the summer and well before this that the emotional tax that women of color face in the workplace is considerably greater than Caucasian women. So I think you got to really dig in and listen to understand unique experiences that women in your workplace have and identify further opportunities to engage with women from all manner of communities, backgrounds, educational backgrounds is really critical to the success because until everybody feels included, you haven't won this race. We're really fortunate to have a very engaged women's initiative within the organization who together have been able to achieve some really great things, and of course look at this beyond just the lens of gender.
Ira, I wanted to ask for your thoughts on that. How do we address these other intersectionalities?
Well, I agree with Mary. It comes with listening and engagement first. I think it's also really important to understand your communities of interest. What is the diversity within your communities of interest, and are you representing that community well within your organization? And I've spent a lot of my career working north of 60 in Canada before I went to Botswana, and so we've done a lot of work with Indigenous communities. And when I started in my career, the attitude in the diamond mines as they were just being discovered and developed in the Northwest Territories was, Indigenous community members really aren't interested in jobs in a mine. And of course, that was complete nonsense. They were interested, but they had to be engaged, and there was training commitments, and there was basically a direction that had to be taken in order to allow those community members to participate in the industry. And now we've got greater than 40% Aboriginal employment in these diamond mines, which is tremendous because many mines to that point could never get above 5%. So I think it's about really listening and understanding your communities of interest and how best to reflect that within your organization when you're setting your goals and looking at kind of the barriers to creating a more diverse workforce. We all know the benefits. We've talked a lot about them today, and it's clear for those companies that have been early adopters of diversity. I mean, it's a no-brainer. But I think it really is about now taking it to the next level. And this doesn't happen overnight. It's these are hard pieces of work that we're talking about. And I agree with Mark that the first step of identifying those candidates, they're out there. Like that part is easy. But when you start to really build diversity and inclusion into your vision and your mission over a long time horizon, it's pushing beyond to what Mary was talking about, pushing beyond an immediate goal of getting 50% women, where things start to I think those challenges really start to manifest in a much bigger way.
Okay, excellent. We have some great questions from the audience that I'd like to pose. I'm going to start with you, Mark. Can you provide any examples or experiences of what not to do or what hasn't worked or what to be mindful of when starting a formal diversity and inclusion agenda?
I can't think of I think the only thing I would say is beware of waiting. Start now. I think if anything else, what doesn't work is if you don't kick it off as quick as you can and make a determined effort. Because again, going back to what I was saying, real change happens, if you take concrete steps to make it happen. I personally believe the issues we're talking about, whether any aspect of diversity that we want to promote, inclusion we can promote, these are not unsurmountable issues. I just look at the success that IRA has. It's fantastic when you look at that, and we can achieve these things in a reasonable amount of time. I don't think it needs to take 3 generations. Think about the attitudes that we had certainly 20 years ago. I certainly can remember our attitudes towards smoking in North America, our attitudes towards drinking and driving. We made radical change. We can make the same radical changes here, but we have to put concrete steps. And that's what I believe in. So don't wait, make those concrete steps now and use things like, for example, I really believe in asking employees. So we put together employee resource groups on sexual orientation, about women in aviation, because there's not enough of them, as just an example, and ethnicity, women or parents with special need kids. So I always believe if you ask employees and you kind of do what they say, you're probably not going to go too far off.
Mary, did you have anything to add on what not to do or what hasn't worked from your experience?
I guess I'd say beware the naysayers and the hand wringers, because when you start out on this journey, you do have to engage with people who are worried about what you are doing and who question whether the outcome is going to be positive for the organization. So it's important to engage with them, but you can't let them stop you. When you know what you're doing is right, when you know what you're doing is going to have a positive impact on your business, you can engage lightly and then show them the value of the changes that you're making. That whole issue of there aren't women candidates. It's just not true. It might be harder to find them. You might have to look in different places than you have looked historically, et cetera. But all of these things that seem to be truths and ultimately are myth, the myth is busted. So just beware how much you engage or how much you worry about doing something that you ultimately know is right. Just drive on, and it gets done.
Just as a follow-up to that, a lot of times we hear people say to women, you need to speak up. You need to call out instances of either policies or when things happen in the workplace that are just not cool, that things that lead to negative outcomes for women. But people often struggle to speak up, and they often struggle to find the words to have that kind of constructive conversation that leads to change without getting people's backs up. So what is your advice to women or men who actually want to address these sorts of issues in the workplace in a constructive way?
Yeah, so the first piece of advice that I have is exactly what you have said, that it's not women who need to speak up, it's everybody who needs to speak up. The development of a collective consciousness that actually has empathy for other people in the organization is really at its root what you're trying to get at, so that you can bring the best out in people and everybody can achieve their professional possibilities. So it's all of our responsibility to be able to speak up. I think there are very many respectful ways to ask questions. Oftentimes I find that when I engage in a conversation where someone is worried about a decision that has been made, et cetera, sometimes it's just we haven't done a good enough job of communicating, or somebody doesn't understand a policy or why we made a decision in the way that we did, et cetera. And that engagement is really important. So I view it as a gift if I am ever confronted about anything that the organization is doing, because it gives you the opportunity to be able to communicate and to understand, and then to question whether or not what you're doing is actually hitting the mark of what you want to achieve with diversity. So I think respectfully asking the question why is always, in a good organization, in an organization where you want to work, asking why is always an okay thing.
Okay, I have a question from the audience here, and I'll direct it to Ira. This is from someone named Tim. Women also have to deal with certain personal limitations associated with raising children, supporting aging parents, etc. How have you all addressed these issues in your companies? Ira, I'll go with you first.
That's a great question, and I think it goes back to what I said earlier. Is when you're sitting down, with your female employees and leaders, and mapping out a career path, and that includes what are your personal aspirations. And I think for the longest time, certainly in my generation, I had my first child at age 40 because I wasn't prepared to take a time out for fear of not being able to keep on, the trajectory that I'd set out for myself. And I think that today there is just no excuse. There is no woman on the planet or no career, I don't think, that can't be accommodated and balanced with family aspirations. And interestingly, today it's actually my young men in my organization, because they're married to women that are professionals, and it's the two of them balancing the family obligations. And so we really try and work with them, and particularly in this age of communication, I think it's really about getting it on the table and making sure that everyone's expectations are being met. And it goes back to, I think, which has been a theme today, about that strong engagement and communication, and making sure that is not something that is ignored or set aside, or we'll deal with that when we get to it, which, can happen too. But, put it on the table and plan for it, and ensure that you are not sidelining your high potential people because they've made a decision to go off and have children. It doesn't need to be a timeout. It just needs to be managed in a way that meets everybody's expectations.
Mark, let me come in a bit. Accommodations for women in the workplace.
Well, look, I think I would add exactly to what Ira said. Not much to add, except to say that I think we've all learned, for obvious reasons, just there's this pandemic, to do things virtually, right? Let's keep doing that. I mean, not to the extent we're doing now, obviously, but I can tell you, coming out of this, that I've mandated, my team knows, and we have built a plan that from here on in, a quarter of our workforce will be working remotely, and not the same people all the time, on a rotation basis. And that, to me, and we've really gone to employees and talked about that can have huge benefits from a work-life balance point of view, not only for women, for men as well. And I think going back to what Ira was saying, we have to plan for it. It's a normal part of life. And we're not going to sideline half our potential population of women and make it such that they would have to sacrifice a decision like that. Personally, I'm appalled that, like the example that I said, that have to delay their career because of that. I see it as my personal responsibility and a responsibility of us as leaders to make sure that we build that flexibility in how we look at our workforce overall. So nobody has to make those kind of choices unless that's what they want to do.
Mary, did you have anything to add on accommodations?
Yeah, sure. I think that that our current environment has amplified this 1,000 times for men and for women, because in addition to the stresses associated with COVID, many of them have been cast in the role of teacher in the midst of all of this, and so that's taken an enormous toll on their time. And I think that organizations have to meet their employees where they are, and understand that the disposable time that was available to an employer a year ago is different today, and just to work with employees to be able to plan for that. So I think that that's been a good evolution in all enterprises. And then the other thing I would say is just beware the reentry burn of coming back from maternity and parental leave, because it looks like it's easy and it's not easy. And again, I give credit to our WIN group for bringing this to the forefront. Speaking of women being willing to speak up and saying it's not just a switch. We can't just have somebody go away for a year and a half and then come back and expect that everything's normal. It's like re-onboarding.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I remember changing diapers and reading the newspaper on the change and underlining things with pen because I didn't want to fall behind when I took time off for my 2 children. We're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time for this session, but there's a lot of great questions that I didn't get to, and I feel badly about that, but it was a great discussion. And I want to thank you all for your wonderful insights on strategies on what to do. I hope that you've given a lot of people many solutions to think about and to implement in their own organizations. I just wanted to remind the audience that we are headed into a little break. And the webcast will return at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. But again, to Mark, Mary, and Ira, thank you so much for your time and for your insights, and for everyone for listening.
Most welcome. Thank you very much. Stay safe, everyone.
See you after the break.